Thanks for listening to the Archbridge podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wilternich, and today I'm happy to be rejoined by Gonzalo Schwarz. Gonzalo is the founder and CEO of the Archbridge Institute, and I should add, my very capable boss. Gonzalo grew up around the world, spending time in Uruguay, Israel, Ecuador, Bolivia, before coming to the United States and earning his master's degree in economics from George Mason University. He started the Archbridge Institute to pursue his American dream and to lift the barriers that prevent other people from living their dreams as well. And before starting the Archbridge Institute, Gonzalo was the director of strategic initiatives at the Atlas Network. So Gonzalo, thanks for coming on again.
Thank you for having me, Ben. Very excited to be with you here in this great podcast that I think you're doing a terrific job in managing for us.
Very kind, very kind. Well, one of the things I wanted to mainly talk with you about today, we have a new report out that you actually authored and oversaw pretty much completely here that highlights the American Dream. This is the second edition of our survey, so it is the American Dream Snapshot for 2021. But before we get into that, I want you to just describe a little bit about why is the American dream so important to you? Why is that something that's been a theme in a lot of your writing and a lot of your research?
Yes, no, thank you very much, Ben. It's a great, first question to start us off with. And I think it matters for me in a way because, it's going to sound a little bit corny, but I'm in love in a way with the American dream because I think it's an amazing national ethos that I can think of no other country that has it. It's very forward-looking and hopeful. And I think that matters a lot for many different things, for policy conversations, for just the culture that the country has. And for me, it's like a vision statement for the United States. It's based for a country, to call it that, to sort of put it in perspective that a country can have a vision statement, right? So when we think about like business administration, we go to some of these classes and we think about a mission and a vision for a business, for an organization, we always think about and talk about a vision as something forward-looking. What do we aspire to be in the business, or what do we aspire to achieve? And I think the American dream applies like a vision statement for the United States because at its core, at the more important or sort of common definition of the American dream by James Truslow Adams back in the 30s, it was a land where people seek to live better, richer, and fuller lives, regardless of where they started. And I think that sort of sets the path for how can the country look hopefully into the future. I think it's sort of the modern version of what in the Declaration of Independence was sort of discussed as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think pursuing better, richer, and fuller lives is sort of the more current, more modern, I think, mantra that the United States has. And I think it's relevant for a lot of different aspects of American life, or even personally and culturally, what do we aspire to be as individuals and as a nation. And I think for me, I say that I'm in love with it because as I came to the United States, obviously I knew that it was wealthier than other countries. My dream or my vision, because I studied economics, my idea with studying economics is to try to address world poverty. As I said, I grew up and lived around several countries around the world, many of them like Bolivia, like Ecuador, or even Uruguay, to call it that, or poorer than the United States, or very poor in some cases. So that was always living around that. And my family background is more middle class, lower middle class. So I wasn't dealing that much directly with poverty, but I saw it all around me. And that was my impetus to start studying economics. But when I came to the United States, I understood sort of the richer part and how nations should seek to live better, richer lives, or how we aspire to have more economic growth that will allow us to do more things. But the American dream embodies that, but embodies a lot of other things. It embodies that more optimistic and hopeful view of a future that Americans and American entrepreneurs or just American people aspire for more and usually achieve it, usually set up to fulfill goals, and that American dream serves as an engine to push them to do more and more and work hard. And it's, as the definition says, it's regardless of where they started. So it's so many stories. And in my case, my dream is now to have a nonprofit organization that does public policy research, trying to rekindle the American dream, or trying to rekindle, trying to address barriers to social mobility and human flourishing. And I came from very, as I said, middle class, somewhere very strange or rare outside of the United States. And I came here, and now I'm leading a nonprofit organization that sort of, we're obviously, as you know, we're not up there with some of the more impactful think tanks, but we're in the conversation, and we're working alongside some of the greatest researchers in the world in this field. So I couldn't have dreamed that when I was little, but it's that aspiration, and arriving here led me to think, oh, I can do this, because look, so many other people have done amazing things while pursuing their American dreams. It could be lives of more richness, but it's more about the component of better and fuller lives that people want to aspire to achieve big things, whether it's building rockets like Elon Musk now, or pursuing a dream of equality like we saw with the civil rights movement. So it's always the country. That mantra has helped it improve itself and look forward and achieve great things and overcome great obstacles. So that's, in a way, trying to sort of, sorry if I gave a roundabout answer to it, but sort of trying to link why I think it's important for the country with my personal example as well. But that it happens all around us all the time. That's what sort of motivates me. It's a country full of people aspiring for better, richer, and fuller lives, and that it's inspiring.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It also kind of occurs to me that a lot of people, myself included, who maybe were born here or grew up here, I think I take that for granted a lot. It's certainly something that I'm aware of. I've heard the phrase, I understand it, I think, but I certainly don't understand it in the context of my own personal life and making some pretty big changes about where I was going to live, how my life would go. And so I don't know. I think sometimes it's a helpful reminder. It's helpful to get somewhat of a more outsider's perspective on it. And that can sometimes highlight its importance to me. It's in a way that it's been easy for me to forget or overlook. So kind of on that note, I did want to ask you, this is something that we've joked about, here and there. I've never really traveled out of the country. I think I may have been to Canada when I was like a kid or something like that. And I live remotely, like now I'm up in Alaska, but I've never really actually traveled outside the United States, at least not yet. It's something I'm hoping to do. But I wonder, thinking about the American dream, you grew up in a lot of different places and you still travel internationally on occasion. Do you think that if I, as an American who's never been outside the country, you think if I were to go to another country and live there for, say, a year or something, do you think I'd notice that they didn't have sort of the American dream ethos? Do you think that it would, if I were looking for it, do you think it would occur to me to observe that there's a big difference there?
Yes, I would say so, definitely. And it's not to sort of say that compare the countries, say these are worse or these are better, but it's just you can really feel it as you're living in other places, that perspective of that you can have a better and fuller lives. The income itself, there are other countries that I think per capita terms might be wealthier than the United States, some European countries or other Middle Eastern countries like the UAE, or to just give one example. But the idea is that it's better and fuller, because that what sort of underpins the American dream is the freedom to choose on how to live, which is something that we go into the survey that we'll discuss shortly. And you can feel that, and that freedom that in some places is not as existent, and also it's the culture of aspiring for more or achieving more. So Scandinavian countries, for example, are famous for having, say, more upward social mobility, or for having high levels of income and low levels of poverty and inequality. But there is a sense of that they're content, that there is not a lot of just innovation or cutting edge aspirations for cutting edge technologies, or as much as there is in the United States, or aspiring to solve any big problems. That you can see more people pushed into that in the United States, or that people immigrate from all around the world to come to the United States precisely because there is that culture of let's expand the frontier of what we can achieve. In the United States, that frontier in the past was geographic, and we the country itself stopped expanding in a way. But then I think the frontier of expanding the limits of any profession or any idea that is out there to make improvements is very palpable here, and that's why I think a lot of people come here. But abroad, it's even things about rule of law working properly. Of like what we say with my wife, and we joke that it's like we wouldn't go back in a way to some of our countries because here things work. Even like simple things about, obviously we complain here about the DMV, like in any state. I think we can complain about the DMV, but that's still at the end of the day or after a few hours, you get out. We get out of there with a driver's license or whatever paperwork it is. It's a hassle, but you get out of there maybe slower than most other places or things that you need to do in the United States. But back home, doing some sort of similar thing of trying to get paperwork done or trying to even buy a house or buy a car or just operate a business, it's just so complex and everything is always an obstacle, at least in Latin America, for example, that things I just work. It's better in the sense that like you have to spend less time on things that you take for granted here that work properly or that institutions themselves work properly. So that's one thing. Or just even obviously access to healthcare, and the price of healthcare there is a lot of debate here about how it can be cheaper or what makes it that expensive or not. But the quality of it, I think, is very high. A lot of people come here to get treatments for different diseases. I think because we push here the cutting edge and research in medical treatments or healthcare. But even when you go to other countries, there are less capabilities to do a lot of different things, or you wouldn't feel comfortable of getting treatment the same quality or the same effectiveness or of whatever treatment you're seeking to get. So it's basic things about day-to-day family life. It's basic things about not wanting to maybe spend 3 hours in a line to do paperwork for whatever you want to do on a daily basis for like a week, which is sometimes what we had to do back home. It's simple things, but I think, as you said, if you go outside and you explore the world and you see what else is out there, it's not that we need to be content because in relative terms, the US is better, but it will help, I think, people see how much you take for granted everything that you have here, and that even that sort of more dynamic entrepreneurial spirit that the US has had for a lot of different things, not only businesses, but just even civil rights, even like expanding opportunities for people, even for a lot of different social issues. We can afford to complain or to push the frontiers on some of these issues as well, because there is that freedom to do it here. And we don't see that freedom in other countries. Speaking of Latin America, obviously the Cuba example comes to mind. We don't see it in places like Cuba or Venezuela. So it's a lot of different things that, as you said properly, if you go out there, I think you will see that more, and you would value more what you have here and how that the American dream and that idea is sort of innate in everyone's actions here, or can be innate, if we think about it as a healthy experiment in searching for better, richer, and fuller lives.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that certainly makes me more appreciative, of what I've got here than how lucky I've been. Well, let's dig into that survey a little bit. So this is the 2021 American Dream Snapshot. Can you just run through sort of the top line findings? Do people believe in the American dream? Do they think they've got it? How did that come out this year? So, and maybe give us just a brief background on, how many people are in the survey, from where, that kind of stuff. So can you give us like a little outline of that? Sure.
And even as a background, and we started talking about this question or doing the survey, and now in a second year, and just as part of our work on social mobility and human flourishing, because there is this perception that the American dream either is in decline or it's dead on arrival and it's not existent. So I think it's important because we get that perception because that's what we read, I think, in the media, that's what we read in public opinion or in social media. And I think that there's a need to really ask people what do they believe in, not just like just a sector or an elite part of the country that sort of follows media more closely, or that or that's more attuned to some policy conversations or any grievances that they think, this is why I think the country is going to hell in a handbasket in a way. But
in other words, this is kind of Twitter is not real life.
Twitter is not real life. Yes, exactly. And that I think when you talk in your neighborhoods, when you talk to other communities, and you see other people, they have a whole other perception on life and think about some of these issues differently. So the idea is to expand on it, and obviously Pew has done it in the past. Other think tanks have done similar surveys in the past. But the idea is to gauge, well, is it really in decline as we're getting? I mean, obviously, like now, I don't know if you remember, there was a Captain America comic that came out like a new version of the comic that came. I don't know if it was 1 or 2 months ago or something that said, oh, that the Captain America is even revisiting his ideas on the American dream and if the promise of America is what it is. So it's like it's even now permeating pop culture in other places, which is still, I think, part of this class, more I suppose more creative class, more of a smaller but louder group of people that talk about some of these issues. So the idea was to go out there and ask people. So we went and did the survey both years, last year and this year was more than 2,000 people that we interviewed across the country with a nationally representative sample of people. And the main conclusions that we found, both last year and this year, is that most Americans, regardless of race, of income, and education, believe that they have either achieved the American dream or are in their way to achieve it. And only a minority of people, 25% last year and 20% this year. So it came down. And I think one explanation of that is that we did it last year in the middle of a pandemic, presidential election, and everything. And we're still going through the pandemic, I suppose. But I think things are better now. Presidential election is behind us. So that's not a polarizing issue, even though there's still a lot of polarization. But I think the point is that only 20% think that the American dream is not achievable anymore. So if we go by the narrative, public narrative or public perceptions, we might think that it's more than 50, 60% that think that the American dream is dead. But it's only 20%. So I think there is a lot of hope in that it's across different categories of race, of income, of education. They believe that they have either achieved it or on their way to achieve it. On their way to achieve it, I think it's very important to highlight, because it's not only that you achieved it, but it's also that the pursuit of the dream that fills you with hope, that fills you with a vision, as we said at the beginning, and that not a lot of people I can say that they already achieved it, but not because of that they're going to think that it's in decline or that it's dead. That's why I think even in the Declaration of Independence, you have the pursuit of happiness. It's that pursuit of better lives, of improving conditions, and of fuller lives. And that sort of pursuit and path is what people sort of gear themselves towards. And it needs to be an attitude of that it's not a sure thing. The American dream is not that we're all going to achieve it and it's just a given in the United States. You have to pursue it. You have to do specific things and think that you have an agency, individual agency, to think that you're in control, that you can achieve the vision for your own American dream in order to pursue it, obviously, and achieve it. So that being on our way to achieve it is as important, I think, as for the health of the American dream, because that sort of shows that aspiration. Oh yeah, no, I haven't got there yet. But it's also, I don't think that it's unachievable. I'm gonna still do my best and still work hard, or still have a vision or an aim for my life. So I think that's important. So the health of the American dream, according to that question, I think is very healthy, and that more people, as I said, the definition is if it's a land where people seek to live better, richer, and fuller lives, and a lot of people think about the American dream just in terms of wealth, or in terms of income, or in terms of buying a house or a car. So a follow-up question.
White picket fence.
So the second question that we ask related to that first one is what do you think is more essential? So to analyze as essential, important but not essential, or not important, different aspects of what people relate to the American dream. So freedom of choice on how to live came on the top as people said was essential. So 85% of people said it is essential, that having the freedom of choice on how to live, which is what I discussed before, living in other places, or just pursuing different occupations, pursuing different interests, or pursuing different types of life. That's clearly freedom is what underpins the American dreams the most. The second one, 80% of people thought that having a good family life was essential. So that's already two things that I think can give you more of that better and fuller lives aspect instead of the richer part that people confuse or caricature more, that's more related to the American dream.
Right. And obviously having some, amount of wealth or income plays into that.
Plays into that for sure. Yeah. But it's not as essential. And only 10% of people said that becoming wealthy is essential to the American dream. Owning a house or a car, it's more about the 40, 50%, both last year and this year. So it is essential to some, important, obviously, but not essential for others. But I think that feeling and sentiment that it's more about pursuing better and fuller lives is what underpins and undergrades people more when they think about the American dream. The perceptions of the American dream are all about having these better and fuller lives.
Right. Yeah. And that makes sense to me as I would think about it. I think a lot of my peers, they have an idea of how they want their lives to go, at least, in the near future. They want to make sure that they're providing for their families or starting their families, doing well in their careers. But, getting super rich or something is not, they don't really care about that. I mean, obviously you want to earn more, but that's not really top of mind, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think it's more about the meaning and purpose, that what people are saying this here, and what sort of the meaning and purpose of themselves, or even as we discussed before, that the American dream is part of that meaning and purpose for the country itself, even. So I think that sort of plays a lot in this conversation and plays a lot in the culture that we want to have.
You also asked about opportunity. Mm-hmm. So can you walk through some of the questions, or maybe it was just one question that you had about different people and their perception of the opportunities they have, right? Because I think we do hear, from a relatively loud minority, on kind of both sides of the political aisle right now, where it's sort of this us versus them. Some people frame it as sort of like, oh, it's the elites versus the rest of us. Some people think that, there's these structural forces that constrain what we can achieve. And I think that listeners can probably fill in the gaps of how all of that is out there. But there seems to be a shrinking amount of public voices who are saying, like, no, you are in control of your life. You can make these decisions and you can improve. So how, once you get out of that media sort of bubble and measure it, when you ask people directly, what are your opportunities? How do you view your opportunities? What do people say? What is that? How do they report how they view those opportunities?
Yeah, because that's also another aspect, right, of the American dream, that if we have the opportunity to pursue all these lives, like improved lives. And I think it's one of the questions that other people have asked in the past, like Pew, is asking people, do you feel you have more opportunities than your parents had? Because it's a generational sort of question or generational aspect of the American dream, that are we improving in each generation, right?
Right.
That's how you measure income mobility also, right? It's cohorts and generations. So when it comes to this question, let's say we don't measure it in terms of how much income you have compared to your parents, which is the usual measurement, but we ask, do you just have more opportunities? Do you feel that there is still opportunity in the United States to pursue anything that you want to do in life? And most people, both last year and this year, said that they have either more opportunities than their parents, period, or that they have about the same. So very few people, I think it was around 15%. I could be wrong, but it's less than 20%, said that they have less opportunities than their parents. So a lot of people said, no, we have either the same or even more opportunities, and especially Blacks said that they have more opportunities. I think 66% said that they have more opportunities than their parents, and only 4% of Blacks said they have less. So obviously, that's always an issue. Obviously, here in the United States, and we've had a lot of conversations in recent years about this, and it's just there is a lot still that needs to improve. There's a lot of things that we still need to address. But the perception that we're doing worse than in the past, either for that specific group or just generally, is not there. People think that they have more opportunities than their parents. And when a follow-up question that we asked, and as part of this opportunity theme, is if they think their kids will have the same or more opportunities than them. So for that question, it was the same thing. More people vast majority of people thought that they had either the same, that their kids will have the same or more opportunities than them. And very few people said that their kids are going to have less opportunities. So it's still that sort of hopeful, aspirational perception for the United States moving forward that the country will continue to deliver on its promise of opportunities for all.
I think that's another encouraging thing. As I read through some of the results of this survey, I couldn't help but feel a little more optimistic. It's interesting to me to see sort of the disconnect between the respondents in this survey and how they're reporting this stuff. It's all random. They have no reason to misrepresent anything. And what we're hearing, more consistently. So I wonder if that will continue to diverge in the future, or how that'll all shake out. But
and I think that relates to what we were discussing at the beginning. So it matters, I think, if we have a more hopeful and optimistic vision of the American dream or what people think about it, because then you have that. If you feel that there's less opportunities, that it's in decline, it's the difference between thinking that you're able to pursue big challenges or tackle big challenges and problems because you think that there is that hope, that yes, we can do it as a nation, I can do it as an individual. Or if you just feel that, no, we can't do it. It's a different in terms of a mindset that I can't do it. It's hopeless. The American dream is not there anymore. Why should I even try? I think it's very important to highlight that more optimistic vision, because it's that difference about how we're going to face a lot of challenges that we have now or that we're going to have into the future.
Right.
So that sort of really matters culturally.
Yeah, and I think that there is a danger there of letting sort of that pessimistic view become a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Where you view things like you don't have any room to do anything. You can't do anything. You can't achieve, and so you don't try, and then obviously you don't achieve or you don't build anything.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. I think that is probably kind of one of the things that's, at least right now, is somewhat understudied from our current sort of cultural and political moment. The way in which a lot of the negativity and pessimism might be feeding itself. But anyway, I did want to kind of touch on a few of the other things that you asked about in the survey. So one of which that jumped out to me as an important thing to talk about was this issue of equality, right? Mm-hmm. And sort of, right now there's a lot of discussion about equity versus equality, and things are kind of jumbled in terms of the way academics use those terms versus activists use those terms. Of course, we had Kamala Harris, the vice president, tweet out during the campaign that kind of infamous little cartoon that she had, where basically the takeaway from it was we achieve equity when everyone ends up at the same place. For a while that was sort of a more sort of right-leaning kind of caricature, this whole, they want equality of outcomes. And then she just kind of came out with it. And in a way that was a little bit jarring, just to see it so blatant out there. So, can you talk about how do people view equality? Is it more, that Kamala Harris sort of equity view, or is it more of the traditional sense of equality? Or can you explain sort of how you asked that question and what the results were for that as well?
Sure. Yes, and that's, as I said, you framed it very well, because that's sort of what we're discussing here. What does equality mean to people? So that's sort of a common debate or point of contention between academics, activists, policy folks. So it's important to ask, for people generally, what does equality mean to you? And that was precisely how we asked the question. And we had different options, and we had that specific answer related to that tweet by the vice president. And we asked, does equality mean when everyone ends up in the same place? Then we had another one that sort of represents more equality of opportunity, in a way where that we ask, when there is equality before the law and people have a fair chance to pursue opportunities regardless of where they started. That's where the sort of more common definition, I think, even relates to the American dream. Then the other one was when everyone starts in the same position, because that's sort of say, okay, we can have equality opportunity, but we have to help people. We need to. It's an equality opportunity if people don't start in the same place. So we ask, okay, is that what it means to you? And then the last one, well, we have obviously one that was like none of the above, but the last one was when people who start with more disadvantages are given tools that could help them catch up with the others. So that was sort of trying to do like a wide array of different options for what equality can represent to people. And the vast majority, 66% of people said that equality for them meant when there's equality before the law and people have a fair chance to pursue opportunities regardless of where they started. So that's still a very loaded answer. There's a lot of things that we can that we can follow up from that. Do we really have equality before the law or not? So we can debate that stuff. But the idea is that it doesn't mean when everyone ends up in the same place. Only 4% of people said that it meant for them that when everyone needs to end up in the same place. So for me, that's a positive because I really don't think that that's what equality should mean. And then when everyone starts in the same position, it was only 10% of people that said that. So it's not a matter of people think, no, don't worry, just give me a chance and I'll get there. And I think that that's a more hopeful and more aspirational view of that American dream to say, no, I don't need to start in the same position. Regardless of where I start, if I'm giving a fair chance, I'll try to aim high and achieve and achieve my truest potential. I think with the other one, starts in the same position, people can achieve more, but it's not that people are demanding that we start in the same place. Or even with the last one, only 11% said that it's when people were with more disadvantages given the tools to catch up with others. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people who are more advantaged now could have been that their parents or even themselves started in a much lower position in the income ladder or started with more disadvantages, and they got to where they are by just effort or by overcoming obstacles regardless of what they were. And it's not that those obstacles don't matter now for other people, but it's that pursuit of overcoming those obstacles that makes the American dream special. It makes that earned success that people have at the end of the day more special. So I think that's why how I think about this question, that 66% of people say that equality for them meant having equality before the law and a fair chance to pursue the opportunities regardless of where they started. So that's the thing was more optimistic and hopeful for me.
Yeah, that's also encouraging to me as well. I was really happy to see that only a small minority, 4%, kind of shared that, Kamala Harris's vision of the equality of outcomes, and that. That's really to me that's encouraging. But it is interesting to see how some people are different in the way that they define that. I think we throw around these terms of equality, or even some people throw around equity, and they're loaded, right? Like they're not, people are not understanding them in the same way all the time. They both sound pretty good, but the way that people really think about it. So it's been helpful, I think, for me at least, to get a good sense of, okay, well, what does the average person typically mean by that? And so I think that was a helpful part of it. So one of the last questions that I wanted to kind of get to in the survey before we move on to some other topics was we did ask about what people's beliefs on the proper priority for public policy, what that should be in terms of economics. And you also dove into sort of a related question, which is, we're all concerned with people being able to climb the income ladder, particularly across generations. But we want people to earn more money. We want people to be able to live those richer and better and fuller lives. So can you talk about those questions and how people viewed the best ways to climb the income ladder, and then the related question about how public policy plays into that, and sort of what role should public policy take on when it comes to that?
Yeah, and in this sense, we sort of asked or thought about this issue in question because how I think we viewed the conversation in terms of income mobility and upward income mobility is that it has been, I think, politicized in a big way. It has been like the terms have been intertwined too much. People use interchangeably income inequality with income mobility or with poverty. And those are very different things. All of them are different things. They have different solutions, different policy priorities.
I know that's a big pet peeve of yours when people you swap out those terms like they're the same thing.
Exactly. And it's not the same thing. And I think we need to have, like, if you care about income inequality, and the issue that you care about is that the gap is growing and some people are being left behind, that's okay to worry about those that are left behind and finding what are the best way for them to climb. But that's different than saying, okay, we need to close that gap. It doesn't matter if the ones that are left behind are still there, but we care about the gap growing smaller. There are ways to reduce that gap. There are ways of like taxing more, doing other things but that will not help the people that are in the bottom. So that's a whole, I think, other conversation. But that sort of in a way matters here because when we think about policy, what should be the policy priority? If those things are indeed the same, which they are, and we can go later in depth, or we can put some links to other research or other articles where people sort of try to distinguish those three fields. But if those are different, what do people think should be the priority? Is it to reduce the income gap? Is it to reduce, sort of to help people climb out of poverty? Is it just ensuring that people have that fair chance to climb, which is, I think, more related to just income mobility? And on that, very few people, very few people have as a policy priority that we should need to close the gap between the rich and poor. They don't see it as a priority. 24% of people say that that's the priority. Then 41% said that it's ensuring everyone has a fair chance of achieving success. And 26% said that ensuring that Americans do not live in poverty. 9% said that none of the above are important policy goals. But the majority of them said, people answered that it's about ensuring a fair chance of achieving success and not living in poverty. Those two, I think, have more in common in terms of barriers that impede people to climb the income ladder or obstacles than I think that what they have with inequality. But I think only a quarter of people think that that's the main policy priority. But I think if you go with the public narrative or discourse or those numbers should be you think they would be much higher. And that's more than half of the country is worried about that, or 70, 80% of people. Or when it comes to solving what could be seen now as stagnant income mobility, because that's what the research has shown. Some people have shown that it's really in decline. Some other people have shown that it hasn't changed by a lot. Research by our advisor, Scott Winship, or research by Rush Chetty shows that it's in decline. Scott said it's not as in decline as we think, but it's still stagnant or hasn't changed a lot for a long time. So it is really an issue. We definitely, and that's what I think that's why we try to do as a think tank, identify what are those barriers that make mobility be stagnant or that are in the way of people climbing up the income ladder. So that's important. But do we solve that by reducing the income gap? At least that hasn't been our idea, and we're trying to separate those issues. But as this survey shows, that hasn't been a priority, I think, that people think that policy should be concerned about. So that's also the question that we want to have there, because that's what, as I said, it's in the public narrative of perception. Oh no, it's all about income inequality. That's the main issue that we need to solve. And sorry, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it definitely answers my question. I mean, that's something we hear a lot is, the gap between rich and poor is greater than it's ever been, which, I mean, maybe. I guess a lot of that really depends on how you measure and family size, and a lot of more technical things go into that. I think people just tend to assert that, but
and even then, even if it is very high, what is causing that, and what is the barrier that causing that? I think what we've tried to do is that our focus is what is the barrier that might be causing that gap to expand, or it might be causing people that are still in the bottom half to not climb up and higher. And I think for that, there's barriers that would generate both low income mobility and higher inequality, because people who are middle class or more affluent can overcome barriers. For example, if it's an education barrier, that they don't have access to quality education, well, middle class or upper middle class people or rich people can move neighborhoods to a better neighborhood where there is better public education, or they can send them to a private school. People who are poor don't have access to that to move as easily. But is the problem there the poor quality education or the income? It's the idea of how we're structuring public education, or how do we what are the policies that lead to either lower quality or that don't lead to maybe more competition in terms of education for that quality to improve. I don't know, but the idea is that barrier, people who are better off are able to overcome it. But the problem there is the barrier. It's not the gap itself. And then other issues like when it comes to maybe entrepreneurship and building businesses, if there is a specific regulation or a specific occupational license that you have to get and that you have to take a lot of hours of time or money to get a license, people who have either, let's say, like one person in the house that can work, that is working full time. So the other person, the husband or wife, if they want to go and pursue some occupational license, they have the possibility because one partner is working, so that they have the time if the requirements to get that license or job are high. But in terms of people in poverty, it's mostly single parent families. That parent can't stop everything that they're doing or stop working in order to get a license or to switch occupations or to go through various regulations to try to open a business in something that they know that they can do in order to provide for the families. They don't have that sort of time or income to sort of pause for a while, address that, and then start a better job or do something else. But the barrier itself is that high regulations or big requirements to get a license to start any type of professions, which we've shown is very, with some of our research by ETIM, is show that it affects income mobility and inequality across states in the United States. So the problem there is the barriers. So even though the gap might be expanding, the issue there are those barriers. So it's not the income gap per se.
And so I think the clear rule of thumb is that it's easier for people with more income to navigate whatever barriers there are than for people with less income.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
I mean, that's
a great way to summarize that's how people, I think you should know, that's how we operate internally. I have a convoluted answer for things and then always summarizes it in a much better way, more concise way. So that's our MO basically.
But yeah, I think this is an important point where, you're really highlighting that, public policy, ultimately, a lot of it, I'd say maybe even all of it, is about trade-offs, right?
Yes.
It's you're navigating these trade-offs. And so, I think we could just, at the drop of a hat, we could devise, a plan to shrink the gap between rich and poor that would be extremely effective. I mean, if you want to just say, let's put a 100% wealth tax or even a estate inheritance tax after $5 million or something like that, you'd shrink that gap. It would disappear very quickly. But that wouldn't necessarily help anyone. In fact, I could see that leading to a lot of really bad things. Mm-hmm. But if the gap is what you're concerned about, you can solve it. And so I think having a little more nuance in exactly sort of what that priority is and what it should be is important. It's an important part that gets glossed over a little too often, I think. Yeah,
and related to that, a follow-up question I think applies to this, and that's where I think you were leading on with the original question, is that we also asked one of the last questions what is the most important precondition in enabling people to climb the income ladder? So what do we need to have in terms of the environment, the policy environment or economic environment for more people to climb it? And we included in that, one of the answers was a low level of income inequality. But the other issues we sort of gave as options is a strong labor market and high level of economic growth was one. Then also stable family structure, which has been shown that's very important for income mobility. A strong government social safety net, because the focus sometimes in these conversations, policy conversations, is how can we tweak the social safety net to provide more help for people that are in distress. But does that lead them? The question is, in that specific case, does it lead them to climb the income ladder or just to be able to be better in poverty, to ameliorate that sort of position that they are in life at that moment, but does it allow them to then climb it? So that's another option that we have. Then increased access to higher education, then other or none of the above. And there, the most important precondition to enable people to climb the income ladder was a strong labor market and high level of economic growth, followed by increased access to higher education, and then stable family structure. But only 6% of people said that the most important precondition was having a low level of a low level of income inequality, and only 5% people said that we need a strong government social safety net for that. So those answers I think go against the grain, or go against even the grain of what we should focus in terms of our policy conversations that are sometimes in this specific field, more about social safety net and how to improve that. Because sort of a follow-up question that we also had is, what is the best way for people to climb the income ladder? Is it through a college degree or a well-designed government assistance program or a high degree of family and social support or a job? And and where we got in that question is that it is 50% of people said that the best way is through to climb the income ladder is through a job, which is, I think, is obvious, but it's one of those things that we take for granted, that jobs are just created. Or related to the previous question is that we'll have a very strong labor market, high level of economic growth. It's sort of a given. But it's not a given. There are a lot of barriers and problems in the way that lead to less job creation. Some other research by the Economic Innovation Group shows that business dynamism, the amount of startup activity, it has been in decline for the last 40 years. Economic Innovation Group has researched that. Other researchers like John Haltiwanger and Yusuf Aksijit from the University of Chicago have researched that. So it's a very documented problem. And how does that impact people being able to climb the income ladder if the main thing that they think they need is a job, when this sort of startup and business dynamism is the main thing that sort of leads to more job creation and more opportunities for to climb the income ladder, right? So I think those questions are related. And a well-designed government assistance program is only 8% of people that say that that's the best way for people to climb the income ladder is through a government assistance program. Obviously, a college degree is 16% support, but the idea there is that, yes, you can have a degree, but do you have a job that you can work in? And in the meanwhile, there's a lot of other jobs that, because there is a skills gap, because there is other terms of gaps and issues in the labor market, that positions that are not getting filled in trades or in manufacturing, trades or other sort of businesses or other sort of jobs that are not getting filled. And that's also obviously a big issue. But the idea is that, again, the focus in terms of what are the preconditions, what are the best ways to climb the income ladder, are not around resolving income inequality, are not around a well-designed social safety net, even though it is needed, even though we do need to help people when they're most in need, but it needs to be a trampoline out of that and then working and then getting a job, which people agree is the main way to climb the income ladder, but that I think we've taken for granted that jobs are going to exist and are just going to be there. That should be, I think, a bigger focus, that business dynamism, entrepreneurship, how we generate more of these job opportunities and for people to earn a living and to just have better and fuller lives. Some of these jobs don't necessarily have to put them in the top 20% of people in terms of income, but they do need or do provide a significant sense of meaning and satisfaction that they get through employment to live these fuller and better lives. So I think it's all those issues are very under researched or developed, those connections, business dynamism and mobility that we need to address. But as I said, also not think that it's all about what the current narrative is about. We need to solve income inequality. We need to design an excellent UBI. We need to improve the child tax credit and all that, because that's not, I think, how people view their way up the income ladder. It's not through some of these opportunities.
They clearly don't view those things as their way up the income ladder. I mean, I think that those things are important, or at least they're important conversations to have. But something that you said really kind of stuck out in my mind, which is just the extent to which people who are working on those things are working on, tweaking this program or that program, or, a lot of that kind of stuff that people don't really rate very highly in terms of the way they're going to climb the income ladder. We really do tend to take for granted the fact that there'll just be jobs. Like, there's going to be jobs. Like, if we can get people trained, if we can make sure that childcare is taken care of, if we can solve the problem of transportation, if we can hit all these little check marks, people will be able to get employment. There will be those jobs. And there is we have good jobs numbers for the most part right now. Maybe they could be better, but we don't really know what the world would be like if we had taken this problem of declining business dynamism more seriously 20 years ago. Right. Yeah. If we had really sat down and addressed that and tried to get that rate of new business startups up 20 years ago or 10 years ago, I think we don't really understand how many more jobs we might have today. And so that's
or even it's more job, or it's that fear that automation is going to leave us without a job. And that if you have a more dynamic economy, which the U.S. has always been, and I think continues to be in comparison with other countries, but we can obviously always do better. But that's but I think that's very important. If you have a more dynamic economy, more startups starting to build new even industries in some cases, or new types of jobs, that's very important in order to face the future, the future of jobs. Whether it's as we transition into other types of jobs, or some jobs will disappear because of a variety of a lot of issues. But that's sort of tackling the problem head on. And when we talk about it in that conversation, about giving a universal basic income to people, because we're going to face a future with no jobs, it's like, well, but how can we not face that? Because we can't give. How can we address the actual problem and not put a Band-Aid in what supposedly was going to be a huge hole that will not be covered by that Band-Aid? It's like, why don't we just address the actual core problem there? Or how do we adapt in order to be better prepared for a future that some of the more traditional jobs that we've seen are not going to be available, but newer jobs are going to be, or like newer industries that we can't even dream of now, or that they're just starting now, are going to be able to provide people with more opportunities. And adapting in that way, however we study for those types of jobs, if it's a college degree. So that's why I think college degree is important, and some people access to education is important, but I don't think it's as clear cut yet what type of education, what does that need to be for the future in order to be able to access different and newer types of jobs. So, but anyhow, that's I think a topic for another for an actual expert on that topic, with which I'm not in terms of education, and for another type of conversation. But I think that's all that is important, and having a more dynamic economy prepares us for giving more opportunities to people now and into the future. So that's, I think, a huge challenge.
Yeah. Well, certainly, I'm in total agreement here. Well, I want to kind of round out our discussion on the survey by asking kind of a final question here, which is between this year and last year, did you see any big changes? Were there any big shifts? I mean, you kind of hit on one, I think, earlier, but was there any other big changes that you saw year over year?
Yes, the main change, I think, was in that first question. So everything else was sort of similar in terms of people having more opportunities. We did ask last year the question of what's the most important policy priority for people. So that didn't change. It was the same last year. I think maybe 20 to 25% still answered that it's reducing the income gap, but the majority of people said it was ensuring a fair chance for people to climb the income ladder and to address poverty. So that's still the same. People thought in terms of opportunities that it was almost exact same numbers. The only thing that changed was in the first one question about if you have either achieved or are on the way to achieve the American dream, or if you think it's out of reach. So, and the main change, I think, was in terms of the people that said that the dream is out of reach. Last year, it was about, I think, 24 or 25%, the people that said it's out of reach. And this year, it went down to 20%. Only 20% of people think that only 1 in 5 Americans think that it's out of reach. And I think, as I said before, it's sort of a part of when, the main explanation that I see to it is that when we took that survey, last year, it was in July and August of last year. It was as we were seeing some progress with the vaccines, maybe, but a lot of the issues with the pandemic were still very much alive. Right.
And they weren't widely available yet.
They weren't widely available at all. So the pandemic was still top of mind for a lot of people. Obviously, we had the George Floyd the murder, and you saw people there. You saw a lot of race protests during the summer. You had the presidential election, which was polarizing people. So there wasn't, I think, a lot of sense of hope. Even then, despite that, still 75% of people said that the American dream they achieved it, or they were on the way to achieve it. But still, 25% said that it's out of reach. And I think that explains that change to a lower amount this year, because we have 3 successful vaccines that are helping us get out of the pandemic, or feel more comfortable in going back to normal, slowly but surely, with some exceptions, obviously. and of new waves, new variants, and all that. But I think we're almost out of the dark there. The presidential election has passed. We have other issues or problems, I think, in this presidential election, but the polarization that sort of like that I think any presidential election year brings about is out of the picture. And obviously, in terms of the other issues, there's a race. There's the conversation is still ongoing, but there were some follow up from that with the indictments of the officers into George Floyd case, or the conversation being channeled into other issues and solutions. But just in general, I think that was what explained mostly that change from the previous year to this year. And I think, people still thought they have more opportunities than their parents last year across categories. They think that their kids will have better opportunities. They still thought the freedom of choice and how to live and having a good family lives were the most essential aspects. Last year in that question, I think 13% of people said that becoming wealthy is essential to the American dream. And this year it's 10%. So I don't know if that maybe matters. Only like 3% less of people think that wealth is important. That's not a big change, but still, that's the only thing that I can think of. But the main question was the first one, I think.
Well, I guess we'll just have to revisit this next year too.
Hopefully, we'll see better numbers.
Right. Well, okay. I want to ask. We're almost at an hour here, so I want to ask one final question, sort of in closing, which is, kind of taking a step back for a minute. It's 2021 now. This is our second edition of this particular survey. You started Archbridge 5 years ago. And I joined, several months after that. But I kind of want to take a broader lens here. What, if you could think of maybe what are 2 or 3 things that have surprised you most from working on economic mobility and really digging into the American dream, as you've run the think tank. What are some of the things that have surprised you the most, or maybe some of the things that have come up that you didn't expect in those past 5 years?
Yeah, I think it's mainly 3 issues. The first one, and 2 of them I already touched on. The first one was that because I'm more attuned to policy conversations, Twitter conversations, social media conversations. I had that perception as well. I didn't have it myself. I'm always a little bit more optimist. I like to say glass half full, which I think what the American dream is always seeing the glass half full in a way. But I always thought that the American dream was in decline, not existent, that people were very down on it, that people weren't as hopeful, as aspirational as what we've seen in the surveys. That there is that more positive attitude that I thought. So that surprised me, because if I go by what in my day-to-day interactions with people in the think tank community, academic community, what I see in the media, what I read in social media, so you would think things are much worse than what these numbers in the surveys have shown in the last 2 years. So that's one thing. The second thing that surprised me was, as I delved into more of the social mobility research and literature, and sort of already touched it as well, is that how little attention is given to that problem of decline of business dynamism in the context of the inequality and income mobility conversation, or just that how we take for granted that aspect of job creation, that entrepreneurs will always be there, and how much I think personally that's a key. From what I've seen in living in other countries, that entrepreneurial spirit, the private sector being as dynamic as it is here, the rules of the game that are much clearer here compared to any of the other countries that I've lived in, I think have allowed the United States to be wealthier and to be better off than many of the places that I lived. But so when I thought about in the context, when I was living in Bolivia, for example, when I did my undergraduate degree, so why is the country still poor? We do have a lot of government plans. There is a big focus on poverty solutions. There is a big focus on government intervention here. Why, if that's sort of the key or the solution that we're told in the public narrative, why are things not good here that much? And I never, in my education there, I didn't delve too much into that entrepreneurship aspect or the competitiveness aspect of an economy that leads to more like stronger labor markets and stronger economic growth. But that's sort of that entrepreneurial culture that in which there's a lot of people who are very entrepreneurial in any of the countries that I lived in, but the conditions are not there. and the bureaucracy is big, regulations. It's not easy to start a business. So some of these aspects that I then realized after leaving the United States, both because I did more research on these issues, I was taught different things, I think, in the master's in economics that I did here in the United States, compared to what I did in my undergraduate in Bolivia. I learned about newer things, about newer areas of work and how do they relate to a thriving economy and how the rules of the game matter and all that. But it was also coming here and seeing that entrepreneurial spirit that the United States has, that so many entrepreneurs trying to push the boundaries, trying to, in search of, I don't think necessarily higher profits or just money, but in pursuit of big goals, in pursuit of serving other people better. More businesses are started, more entrepreneurs are successful. And I think it's that attitude. And I have like a cheat thing here that I like to have next to my desk, like a Walt Disney quote: "If you can dream it, you can do it." And that's sort of one of the things that I realized, even like as I'm studying this. But I did a trip to Walt Disney with my family, to Disney in Orlando with my family, to think about Walt Disney as a person, this entrepreneur who started almost a whole industry, a whole sort of type of movie filming and making in a way that sort of pursued his dreams relentlessly. Even if he wasn't successful at the beginning, it took him, I think, 20 years to get out of the red. He was always in debt. And then when he was doing better, he reinvested things to create, to entertain people more, to give them better products. And he didn't care too much about that profit. It was that fulfillment. But then in the meanwhile, he created a business now, or a company that employs hundreds of people, thousands of people around the world. Has inspired others to pursue their dreams. But just that entrepreneurial aspect of Walt Disney, coming from really nothing, a family, I think, of 12 brothers and sisters, to get to where he is, I think was a testament, because his story is very special. But the fact that there is so many stories of so many successful entrepreneurs in the United States shows how special this country is in terms of that. So just anyhow, it's a roundabout way to say how important that has been for the United States, and how important that has been for creating opportunities and more jobs and more avenues for people to climb the income ladder, and how that aspect of entrepreneurship and business creation is not part of the social mobility conversation, and that we're focusing only on reducing income inequality. So then what do? We raise either minimum wages, or we increase the taxes on the rich. That then leads to less hiring in one case, or less business creation in the other, if we tax businesses more. Just as two short examples. But that's what surprises me, that the focus is more, as we said, on the social safety net programs, that the focus is on how do we tweak different programs that are not at the focus of people when they're thinking about climbing the income ladder. It's not like, oh, I need to climb the income ladder, I'm going to go get a government plan. It's not part of the conversation. It's not that it's good or bad, but that's not what it is for most people. But that's not part of the mainstream conversation on social mobility and inequality. Is just, for me, was sort of boring, mind-blowing, but also worrying in a way, because we don't have the eye on the ball on what we really need to change, or what we really need to address. And the last part was, obviously, as a parent, is not that surprising, but the importance that family structure has on developing and promoting skill development in kids, and how that has impacted both the inequality and mobility conversation. We have research by Jim Heckman looking into this, showing how the role of family structure plays in developing skills from a very young age. So it's not a matter of universal pre-K. It's not a matter of other education, early childhood education in terms of schooling, but it's more about strong and stable families that will lead to developing skills better, both hard skills like cognitive skills, or soft skills that are very necessary in today's labor market. So that the importance that family structure has on that, I suppose it shouldn't be surprising, because as a parent, I know that I need to be there for my kid, teach them things that they don't know at the beginning when they're starting their lives. My kids are 10 and 7-year-old, but like reading to them at a young age, the importance obviously of staying together as a family. So I'm still married after 11 years, obviously. Many challenges with being married that long, but still not a lot. That's a whole other podcast as well. But thinking about all those things and how those things impact kids, and how that impacts that conversation on mobility and inequality, I didn't know it was such an important aspect in the in what the research shows, but I think it's still taboo in a way to talk about it or to discuss some of the things in the mainstream of the mobility and inequality conversation. And it shouldn't be, because it's an important issue. It's not about pointing fingers to one person or the other. It's about thinking about the problem in as a bigger perspective as possible. And I think that that's still very needed in the mainstream conversation on mobility and inequality, that aspect of family structure in promoting and developing skills and developing human capital. So I think those are the three main things that I've come to learn or think about more in these first 5 years. And there's still, I think, a lot more to come. In a way to encompass all this and why I started, I think, the Institute and why we're still going strong, is that surprising fact that there is still no consensus on what are the main barriers to social mobility. That field is very polarized and politicized from an academic or policy perspective, and that I think we don't have our eye on the ball that's the main thing that we need to find. What is that consensus? What are the main barriers? And then go from there to improve some of those aspects. But that there is no consensus, for me, was surprising, because the literature, a lot of the literature is clear on some of these aspects, on entrepreneurship, family structure, and all those things. But it's just not part because of, I'm not sure if it's more polarization in a public discourse or politicization of a public discourse, that we see everything through the lens of politics now, that if you believe one thing, you can't believe the other. But it just needs to be a consensus soon, so we can actually get to the task at hand, which is removing the barriers for people to have flourishing lives, to fulfill their potential, to fulfill their American dreams, to have a better life with less obstacles on their way to trying to achieve their American dreams.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was a very well thought out answer. And I will be right there with you trying to figure all this stuff out. And let's revisit those questions. Let's revisit those things that you mentioned as we continue here. So maybe next year, maybe a few years from now, we'll definitely have to listen to this and see. I'm going to ask you about the progress that we've made on the way. So with all of that, Gonzalo, thank you for being on here with me. Thanks for talking through the American Dream Snapshot for 2021. And let's do it again.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's a pleasure to be with you.